Aloha! You are listening to Inside the Desert Oasis Room, episode number 221. This episode is sponsored by the Tiki Bar T-Shirt Club, where their monthly T-shirt designs pay tribute to a Polynesian bar or restaurant from days long past. Each design is available for a limited time and will never be produced again. For the collectors out there, be sure to check out their subscription program, where they offer a discounted 3, 6, or 12-month plan, or you can always buy shirts one at a time. For more information and to check out this month's shirt, visit tikibartshirtclub.com. This podcast is sponsored by Frogtown Brewery, an independent craft brewery and tap room located in Northeast Los Angeles. Stop in and enjoy one of their excellent beers from their ever-changing, diverse menu. Tell them that Inside the Desert Oasis Room sent you and get your first pint on us. Limitations apply. For more information, go to frogtownbrewery.com and follow them on social media at Frogtown Brewery. Today, we welcome our friend David Badgerow for a return visit inside the Desert Oasis Room, and with a cameo by his partner, Jess. David is the host and producer of the fun and always entertaining Cocktail Fridays channel on YouTube. So on this episode, we naturally chat about all things rum and cocktails. As always, I hope you enjoy this episode as much as we did bringing it to you. If you'd like to follow our adventures, check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/PolynesianPop, where we chronicle events, bars, travel spots, cocktail tutorials, and more. And if you enjoy this podcast, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/PolynesianPop, where membership grants you early access to podcasts and videos, front-of-the-line privileges to new merch releases, as well as exclusive content, meetups, and screen credits. Alrighty, let's get into this. Pour yourself a cocktail and join us inside the Desert Oasis Room. And give it up for my friends David and Jessica Badgerow.
Inside the Desert Oasis Room.
Right, we are rolling. What's happening?
Hello.
Thanks for being back on the podcast.
Thank you.
I love it. So for our listeners out there, our friend Dave Badgerow is back on the podcast with his lovely bride.
Hello.
The lovely Miss Jess. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
The last time I had you on the podcast, Dave, was like 2 years ago.
That's right.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? Like how time flies.
Time has flown quite a lot.
We must have recorded that during pandemic or something, right?
It was. We were still pretty early into the pandemic at that point.
How do I not remember that particular detail? That's crazy.
We don't remember much from 2020.
Right. Well, had you already started your Cocktail Fridays by then?
I think I was just a couple of episodes in at that point, yeah.
Was that a pandemic project?
You know what it was? Because it was started as a result of a joke at work. I was working at...
Oh.
Yeah, I was at DreamWorks Animation at the time. And I used to have a thing there at work when we were all in the studio that we sort of dubbed Cocktail Fridays. And it was just every 2 or 3 weeks or so, I would make tiki cocktails at the studio. We would have like one featured, recipe. And then the joke became that we all had to go home and we would be working from home. And my boss at the time said, well, now that you're working from home, you're going to need to make instructional videos on how to make these things, which he meant as a joke. And I was like, oh, I'm definitely going to make one.
Yeah.
And so we actually made two. Well, we made one, sent it out, and he got so excited by it that he's like, you have to do another one. So we made two. And then after Jess and I made two, we were just like, if we're going to make any more of these, let's turn it into its own YouTube channel. So
I love that. It's crazy because the pandemic, if it didn't happen, you wouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's truly, it seems like there's a lot of cocktail channels that were born out of the pandemic.
Yeah. Well, my vlog was born out of the pandemic.
Oh.
I was just doing the podcast, and then I started doing the vlog because it was, one way is to stay creative. And another thing was that, I had realized that it was a way for me to document what was happening in my life. Mm-hmm. Because, when I was younger and I was too self-centered to care, I never asked my father or my grandfather about our family history. And I didn't know anything about anybody in my lineage past my grandfather. And so I didn't know his name. I didn't have any photos, nothing. And I thought, if I do this thing where I can record what I'm doing, the people that I hang out with, the places that I go, all that kind of stuff, I thought, like, what a gift to leave to my ancestors, right? Because it's the gift that I would cherish 1,000,000%, right? Like having this window into my great grandfather's life. If I could leave that to one of my grandkids who can show it to their grandkids and their grandkids and their grandkids and so on and so on and so on. It's kind of like a time machine.
Absolutely.
So can you imagine, we see these videos, right, that we get all excited about on YouTube, and it's just a guy driving down Sunset Boulevard. And thank God for this guy who had the wherewithal to like hold a video camera and just drive down Sunset Boulevard, and how much we love to watch just driving down Sunset Boulevard. There's no one in the video except for a bunch of old cars and old buildings, but we love it, right? And there's a guy I follow on Instagram. His name is Tony Barnhill. And he takes these old photos from Hawaii. They're old photos from like the late 1800s, black and white photos of like what Waikiki looked like before there were hotels.
Yeah.
And he colorizes them. And they're fantastic.
Yeah.
So my thought is, wow, would it be great to have something like that for my family? I would love that. So maybe I could do that for those that come after me. Right?
Absolutely.
And that's how the whole YouTube thing started. And also, like, we couldn't do anything. So I was thinking of ways to just stay creative, right? And that happened.
Yeah. Yep. And then you have people like me that watch the channel now, like currently, to gain access to bars that I want to go to but haven't been able to go to yet. Like you went to Mothership fairly recently. Bar. Yeah. That's one that both Jess and I want to go to, and I'm like, I have no idea what that looks like, but I sort of get to live vicariously through.
Right. So I have a question for you after starting Cocktail Friday. So you're a drooling bastard, right?
I am.
And when you went on that journey, and I use that word purposely, because people say that they've learned through that journey what they like and don't like.
Yep.
And they discovered this new hobby of spirits and cocktails and things like that. Did Cocktail Fridays do the same for you?
I think so. I think one of the things that we're learning, that channel, when we started it was sort of we were trying to look into recipes that we were already very familiar with. And so we started with like Navy Grog, Mai Tai, the usual suspects. And I think now, as we've gone through, we intentionally have been trying to seek out cocktail recipes from unusual places or from specific bars. And there's now we have all these modern cocktail books, and so it's fun to dig into those and sort of try to widen our, widen the vista of like outside of what we're more familiar with. It's, it's in a small way almost like having another Drooling Bastard challenge.
I was going to say it's actually, yes, but it's also kind of like an expanded Drooling Bastard challenge because you're doing cocktails that weren't part of that list.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like ultra modern.
So now you're saying like, okay, well, I've tried all those. Let me try all these. Mm-hmm. What are you learning from this process that's different from what you learned as a Drooling Bastard?
I think the number one thing for me, at least, is when I was doing the Drooling Bastard, it was more about the end result of the cocktail. And so like because sometimes I would look up what was in it before I tasted it. Like I would try to do my homework before. I'd be like, I'm doing these 4 drinks tonight, or 4 drinks. That'd be a lot. But I'm doing these couple of drinks tonight.
Which you had, I'm sure you were tempted to do on some nights where you wanted to just check them off, right?
There was one night I remember I did 4, and I'm like, I'm not doing that again.
Yeah.
But so I would, basically what I would do is I would just make a mental note of like, well, this tastes like that. But what's different between doing that and Cocktail Fridays is because we are very much making the recipe and looking into, especially if there's exotic ingredients or more difficult to find ingredients, we get to learn a lot about how does every individual ingredient affect the creation, the taste of the cocktail.
Yeah, completely. Because we just saw an example of that with a cocktail that we sampled before we started this recording, right? So before I go any further, for our listeners that are not familiar with what the Drooling Bastard is and what we're talking about, I apologize. I assume that people sometimes know what we're talking about, and so I apologize to those that don't know. What the Drooling Bastard is, there's this water fountain in the Tonga Hut. And the Tonga Hut is a tiki bar in North Hollywood. This water fountain, they've nicknamed the Drooling Bastard. And they started this program where if you drank every cocktail that's in Beach Bum Berry's first cocktail book, Beach Bum Berry's Grog Log, you get your name on a plaque, which they hang over the Drooling Bastard statue. And you become deemed a Drooling Bastard. And bastards for short. People say, "Are you a bastard?"
Are you a bastard?
In the tiki and cocktail or tiki cocktail community, it's pretty much known what is meant by that. Like, have you completed the list? There are 78 drinks on this list, and not all of them are great, but they come from the old tiki bars.
Yep.
The tiki bars that existed in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. That I don't think any of them really exist anymore, right?
Yeah.
Are there cocktails in there from bars that still exist?
There is, yeah. But it's safe to say the majority of those are now extinct, the bars.
The bars are extinct. So our friend David here is a Drooling Bastard. Are you a Drooling Bastard, Jess?
I am not.
So Jess is not a Drooling. Do you plan to go down that
Potentially in the future, but not in the near future.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. So I'm not a Drooling Bastard. So
Are you not?
I'm not. I know people are surprised when I say that, but the reason being, there's a couple of reasons. Number one, it's mainly because I'm a creature of habit. So I'm someone that when I find something that I really like, I order it again and again and again. If I go to a restaurant I really like, I go to it again and again and again. If I go on vacation and I find an island that I really like, I go back multiple times. And the Drooling Bastard thing is, since you're checking off drinks from a list, I would feel compelled to never order the same thing again, which is kind of strange because really it's a way to learn about what you like and what you don't like. So if you find what you like, you want to order it again, right? But if you're trying to complete a list, you don't want to order it again. So it's kind of a conundrum for me. And then the other reason why I don't do it is so how many? 78 drinks?
Yeah.
Let's average like $12 a drink. You're looking at like $1,000 worth of cocktails.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, like 2/3 of them aren't really that great. Yeah. So I just can't throw away like 2/3 of $1,000, you know? So again, I would just prefer to order what I like.
Sure.
That's why I've never done it.
I think to your point in a little bit, the thing that appeals to me about the Grog Log is that you're drinking a drink that someone drank 50 years ago, or, you know.
Right.
They would come from these old tiki bars that don't exist, and much like seeing the photographs of Waikiki before it was developed, I stood in this one place that nothing used to be here.
Right.
And I think that's very interesting, but also to our channel's point, I love being able to choose what I make instead of being told what I have to drink.
Yeah.
But it is also almost a form of nostalgia where I'm like, I am drinking a drink that was made in 1958 or 1965.
Right.
Someone drank this.
Right. So that actually raises a really good point. So I think about like the food that, say, my grandmother made, right? And when my grandmother passed, those dishes died with her because those recipes were never written down, right? And maybe even the recipes, if I followed it today, things would be different because the ingredients change, right? So, for example, these drinks, and that's a great example of drinking something in history, right? This was a drink that someone drank in 1958 or whatever, right? But is it really the same drink today?
Does it taste the same?
Does it taste the same, right? Because today, the limes are different. The spirits are different. The syrups are different. Did you know that that today's banana that we eat at every grocery store, did you know that it's a clone? You did. So Jess is nodding her head.
I'm a weird foodie.
Okay, so you know that. So you know that the original banana that went to the consumer is not the banana that we consume today. So if you had a cocktail made with those bananas, it wouldn't taste the same as the cocktails we have today, right? And you think about the spirits, right? So we kind of touched on this before we were recording, that the spirits today are so different, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Think about the rums, right?
The rums especially, yeah.
There's no way we could duplicate Trader Vic's original Mai Tai.
No.
Because as we said, the fruits are different today. The the syrups are different today.
Yeah.
And you can no longer get the rum that was made with. So we can try to make an educated guess. But if you put them side by side, I bet they'd taste very different from each other.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's funny because we have, this is sort of a small derivation here, but like when it comes to the Mai Tai especially, like people are so kind of micro-obsessed with trying to duplicate what the Vic's Mai Tai tastes like. And now you've got companies like Denizen that have like Denizen's Merchant 8 Reserve, 8-year Reserve.
Right.
That's the whole point of that. It was like sort of co-developed with Martin Cate.
Okay.
Martin Cate and Denizen worked together using the old Dagger rum, the Ray and Nephew, like 15-year-old or something. They tried to duplicate it, and the closest, and Martin Cate actually owns an old bottle that he got at an auction.
Well, he owns the Ray and Nephew 17, right? That the Mai Tai was derived of.
Yeah, sorry. That's the one. Yeah, and so like they used that as basically a tester. And then he developed it with Denizen, and they made that new
to try to duplicate the flavor.
Yeah,
And so as close as they can.
Yeah, as close as they possibly could. So now, in theory, when you try Denizen 8 in a Mai Tai, it's supposed to taste like that original. It's supposed
to. So, wow.
But that's just one tiny example, right?
Here's the thing about all that old rum, right? So we get these really great rums. They get gifted to us, and then they stop being produced. We have the yellow label Lemon Heart. Yeah. We were talking earlier about the Lost Spirits stuff.
Yep.
And other spirits, right? It's not just rum, it's also whiskeys. And really, this stuff is meant to be enjoyed, right? We're supposed to consume it. Like, if it's sitting in a bottle on the shelf, it doesn't do any good. Like, it's not like you have a classic car where you can pull it out of the garage, enjoy it, bring it back in, and then use it again whenever you want. Once you consume it, it's gone.
Yeah.
But what good is it sitting on your shelf in a bottle, right?
Yeah.
So it's just kind of this weird thing that how do we enjoy it, but still have it, right? It's like drinking dinosaur blood. It's like once it's gone, right? So then you have Martin breaking it up in his bottle specifically so they can duplicate that flavor, but he has to consume it. He has to open the bottle, and they have to. They actually have to consume whatever they have to consume to duplicate it. How many tastes did they go through? How many iterations did they go through that? And they always have to go back to that bottle and taste it again, right?
Yeah. That's a sacrifice to the rum gods, is what that is.
What if the first version just sucked? The first version of him trying to recreate it and him just thinking,
we're never gonna.
What am I doing? I'm drinking this.
Why did I crack this open for this?
Well, he's really taken one for the team by doing that.
Oh.
Yeah, seriously. But just the thought of that rum coming back, I wonder what the thought process would be with Vic, Trader Vic, when he was developing his Mai Tai. At the time, that was what was probably one of the best rums out there. And when he developed the Mai Tai, part of him developing that was the goal of showcasing that rum.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
But we live in a world now where, geez, can you imagine what kind of playground those guys would have had if they had the same kind of rum selection that we have today?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like Don and Vic and all those guys, right? And all the old bartenders. Can you imagine how different those bar menus would look like? And how different the cocktails would be if they had the selection that we had today?
Absolutely. And all the different, just super high quality rums from different origins now, You can just, in the massive wide range of Haitian rum, Barbados rum, Martinique rum, super high quality, different versions of Jamaican rum, all that kind of stuff, before you even get into the syrups, So
yeah, and maybe their passions would be different, right? The passion of the bar person back then would be much different, knowing that they have better things to work with. So, for example, we just mentioned how 2/3 of the drinks in the grog log aren't really that great.
Yeah.
But they were just working with what they had. How much better would those drinks in the grog log be if they had their hands on what we have available today?
Yeah. Something that's fascinating to me about the grog log, and I apologize if this is a derivation here, but it's funny to me that rum, or cocktails like art, are sort of a product of their time. And this is actually something that we've discovered from doing Cocktail Fridays, is when we make certain cocktails that are specifically from a certain era in history, or are a evolution of an already existing cocktail, you can sort of trace the influence. And we once did an episode that was about the Beachcomber drink. So Beachcomber's Gold versus Beachcomber's Punch and stuff like that. And that was a bizarre one where it's I thought of it because Beachcomber's Gold is widely considered the worst drink on the grog log. They actually warn you when you start.
Right.
They're like, don't worry, that one's look out for that one. Don't plan to have a good time. It was served exclusively at Don the Beachcomber Chicago. And I believe it was from the 70s. And that was one of those cocktail eras that immediately followed. We're coming off of Tiki first wave, so to speak, Tiki cocktails. And we're starting to go into sort of much drier drinks. And you get Tom Collins and dry martinis starting to get more popular. And so the big difference in that cocktail, a tiki cocktail of all things, is dry vermouth. Dry vermouth, that stuff is so bitter. You would never find that in a tiki cocktail, but I look at that as a natural product of its time.
Sure, yeah, you're right, because that was a 70s thing.
And in Chicago, what could you have access to that far north during the 70s, during not a resurgence, but a pulling back of tiki culture and what's available?
Yeah, and what fresh juices would they have at the time and whatnot? It's super cold climate.
But going back to that Beachcomber's Gold and the grog log, I've been told that there's a misprint or something with that recipe. Well,
it is possible because there's actually 2 Beachcomber's Golds.
Yeah, there's more than one recipe.
Yep.
Actually, I heard there were 3 recipes.
It was actually the reason we made that episode, is because we did an episode that was about let's have what's considered one of the worst tiki drinks ever.
Right.
And then we followed it up with an episode where here's the drink is called the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And yet the recipe is wildly different.
So we made a beer with Frogtown Brewery, and it was a collaboration between Desert Oasis Room, the Dawn of Tiki, and Frogtown Brewery. And it's a Beachcomber's Gold tribute, but it was not based on the grog log recipe. It was based on the other recipe.
Yeah.
Which was actually pretty decent.
Yes.
So when people say, "Oh, that's a horrible drink," I always ask, like, "Well, is it the grog log recipe?" Because there is a different one. As a matter of fact, when Don the Beachcomber in Huntington Beach existed, that was one of my favorite. It was probably my favorite drink on their menu.
Wow!
And they did it with the ice cone and everything, the ice shell. And it was the only drink that one person would make secretly in the kitchen. A specific person would be the only person to make that drink, and he would make it in the kitchen. He wouldn't make it in the bar. Yep. So he'd make it in the kitchen, and then he'd come out and he'd present it. And it came with the ice shell in the coupe glass.
Wow.
And it was my favorite cocktail on the menu there.
And here it is. I actually was looking it up just now. Just like you said, there's 3 versions of the exact same drink.
3 versions, yeah.
The one that's on the grog log is from 1970, and that's the terrible one. Yeah, light rum, dry and red vermouth, Pernod bitters. Yikes.
Oh, so it's just a bitter bomb.
Yeah. And then the original is all the way back into 1937. And that one looks a lot more like what you would expect back then, with gold Puerto Rican, gold Jamaican, dark Jamaican, lime, sugar syrup. Yeah. And then there's the Pernod. That's like the only connection, basically. And then
that's the recipe we used for a couple of reasons. Number one, that was Marlene Dietrich's favorite cocktail at Don the Beachcomber. And he would make that for her specifically because of that. And she was a regular at Don the Beachcomber. And we were doing this collab not just with Frogtown, but with the Dawn of Tiki, who was doing the documentary on Don the Beachcomber. And we wanted to do something interesting to where we used anise instead of Pernod. We used anise in the beer, and we just wanted to be different and hopefully be the first beer that had a star anise in it, you know. So, but that was the recipe that we used, was the 37 recipe.
Awesome.
Yeah. Because that vermouth Pernod bitter bomb, like, that just doesn't work. You know? There's nothing in that drink. There's no sweetener. There's no there's no citrus. There's nothing. Yeah. Right. So
I used to say it's like drinking an ashtray.
Yeah. There you go. Wow. Yeah. But can you imagine if Don and his bartenders had the spirits and ingredients that we have today, what kind of cocktails they would have come up with? Because a lot of his drinks are great. And knowing what they had to work with, it's nothing short of, like, you know, a creative miracle, right? Because, I mean, there wasn't much to work with back then. Now we've got high-end spirits manufacturers, high-end syrups manufacturers. Yep. You know, all the liqueurs and all the flavors.
Yeah, especially the liqueurs and syrups. Like, you have so many places that are making, like, every infusion you can imagine nowadays. Yeah. So you're getting, like, really weird style syrups that go into things. Yeah.
Do you have a syrup that you like to work with that is different than what existed back in the day?
Like a special infusion? I mean, the funny thing is ginger syrup actually is one that we really do love.
You know, ginger syrup is something that I've learned to, like, really, in the past maybe year or two, I've really learned to appreciate it. Yeah.
Hibiscus syrup is really cool.
Yeah,
you get like a good one, you know, or you just make your own, basically. Yeah. So,
another one that I've actually learned to really appreciate, there's a few. One of them is prickly pear.
Yeah.
Because that's really interesting. I really love Fashionola.
Yeah.
And the Fashionola I'm using today, though, how different is that from the Fashionola that's in all the old books?
Yeah.
You know?
What does it taste like? What does it resemble?
So it's really kind of a mystery. I believe that it's really kind of a combination of, like, raspberry and pineapple and orange, and, you know, it's a very rich tropical flavor. I have some here if you'd like to sample some. And back in the day, before, like, this whole cocktail renaissance, people were making it from scratch as best as they could. So I was making it using 50% Hawaiian Punch concentrate. Back when you could buy Hawaiian Punch concentrate, you just add water to it. 50% of that and 50% of Smucker's Red. It's called Smucker's Ruby Red.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a raspberry syrup. So a 50-50 of those. And it actually comes close to the Jonathan English flavor of Fashionola.
Oh.
But we have people making it now.
Mm-hmm.
And their versions are a little bit different. But
Right.
in their defense, you know, none of us were around in the 50s. We don't know what it tasted like.
Right.
So I think we're all just kind of guessing, just like the original Mai Tai
Absolutely.
and all the original cocktails, right?
Yep.
We're just kind of guessing because we didn't sit at the bar and drink those with the way they were supposed to be made.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's super interesting to me. Like I sometimes sort of ponder about the idea of, you know, I'm certain that the cocktails that were being made in the 50s and 60s have to be different from the way they were today. But I also sometimes wonder about, you know, there's the dead zone, the dark ages, so to speak, of complex cocktails.
70s, 80s, and 90s.
Yeah, started at the beginning of the 70s and all the way until the mid-90s, so to speak. And sort of like the reason why Beach Bum Berry went out and tried to resurrect all these lost recipes, I often think like, gosh, I wonder if there were like some rums that, well, certainly we have things like Grand Nephew 17 that are gone, but like if maybe there were other rums that were around back then that died in that dark ages period, and were these bartenders making their own syrups at the time, like to try, like the, you know, was falernum being made like all in-house and stuff like that? I
have some really great stories about some of that stuff too. So like number one, when Tony Ramos was still trying to make drinks, and Tony Ramos was one of the Don the Beachcomber bartenders. You know, he had the secret recipe, the secret syrup recipes memorized. And, you know, in the 90s, I remember sitting at the bar with Jeff Berry and Jeff saying, you know, Tony Ramos is working at a Mexican restaurant downtown.
What?
We could go down there and order these old Don the Beachcomber cocktails, and he'll make them for us.
Oh my God!
And I was like, "Are you serious?" And he's like, "Yeah." He's like, "We can just go." I'm like, "Well, do you want to go now?"
Yes.
And so, yeah, you go down there, right, and you order some of these old Don the Beachcomber cocktails, and Tony Ramos was making the syrups. He was mixing them out of the trunk of his car. And then he was bringing them into the bar. And, you know, this bar, the name of the bar/restaurant was Ciudad. They sold like 200 margaritas a day. And they just had him making these cheap margaritas. They had no idea that they had this Don the Beachcomber mixologist behind the bar that could really make them some money and make these great tropicals, right?
Oh my gosh.
So there was that kind of stuff, right? Where like that lost art was dying, right? But then there's this other thing too that I think about that. So Jeff had these recipes in the grog log, right? And kudos to him for going through all the trouble and interviewing family members of bartenders that have passed, going through their drawers and all that kind of stuff. And these family members were pulling out like old black books or, you know, notes or things from these old bartenders, and Jeff was able to compile a lot of these things and also use educated guesses and, you know, do his own research and think like, okay, let me fill in the gaps for this. It was probably this based on this, this, and this, right? So kudos to him for all that. But I also have like Greg Mansuelo from the Tiki Tea.
Yeah.
His uncle owned the Outrigger.
Oh my God.
In Pasadena.
Oh my goodness.
And Greg has his uncle's black book. And so we looked at some of those recipes. We took some of those recipes and we opened up the grog log, and some of the recipes don't match. So we wonder now, which is the right recipe?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that Jeff's recipe is wrong, but what if the recipe that he got from that bartender, maybe the bartender made it his own way, and so he adjusted the recipe, or maybe that bartender like shortened certain things to make it faster for him to make the drink.
Right. Yeah.
You know, or maybe it was Greg's uncle. Like, we don't know, right? Because neither of us were there, right?
Yeah.
So there's that kind of interesting thing happening too.
Oh my gosh,
right?
yeah.
And that's just those two bartenders. What if we found another black book and then we compared those recipes? How similar or dissimilar would those be? Right?
What? Yeah. I sometimes think about like how and to go back to the Mai Tai and how the Mai Tai originally was made with a single rum, the 17 and then eventually the 15.
Yeah.
And then Vic had to think on his feet when it was like, well, it's all out. And then he's like, well, whatever, I'll use this amount of dark Jamaican against this much of aged Martinique to replicate that. But what if you found an old recipe book that just said this much of dark Jamaican? And then how would that, like the Martinique aspect would get completely dropped out of that had that happened. So you get these weird sort of shorthand things that are written down that result in these derivations, accidental derivations.
Yeah, it's some food for thought, It's really interesting. It's one of those like same world, different dimension, right? Yeah. Like if that's like another branch, right? Yep. So I don't know. I find it rather fascinating. So we're at 33 minutes right now. We're going to take a short break, and we're going to come back after a couple of words from our sponsors. All right, we are back. And what was that topic we were discussing earlier before we got started?
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about just how there was an interesting set of rums back in the mid-century that then sort of evaporated in the Dark Ages. And then thanks to a couple of distributors or a couple of distillers in particular, especially in the 2000s and up, now we have access to just like a whole new range. And it's cool. Like I noticed that in recent times, you've actually had some of these people on your show. Yeah. Honestly, my mind was blown when you had Ed Hamilton on the show. And
so was mine.
I was like, I'm like, the Ed Hamilton? Really? I swear I've actually listened to that episode multiple times because
interesting.
There's so much info in there. And one of the things that I just couldn't wrap my head around, or what I should say is like, I just didn't know, was that it's like he had his whole journey of traveling around on his sailboat, so he claims, and basically becoming friends with all these different distilleries, like in the Caribbean and
he
whatnot.
Just became friends with them because he's a rum enthusiast.
Yeah.
So he would sail his boat around the Caribbean and just drink rum.
Yeah.
Right.
And then eventually, he started importing them in through Florida. Is that correct?
I'm not sure if it's Florida. I assume it is because it's coming from the Caribbean. Yeah. But he's not importing them in the sense of like, well, do you know about the 3-point system? Mm-mm. So we have this like 3-point system or 3-step system or whatever you call it. And it's a rule here in the United States, and it stems from when Prohibition was lifted. So the rule is that spirits can't be distributed without touching 3 points. The 3 points being the spirits manufacturer, the distributor, and then the end customer, which would be the bar, right? So you can't buy your spirits directly from the spirits manufacturer. You have to buy it from a distributor. So I assume Ed is doing that, right? What Ed's doing is he's going and getting the rum made in the Caribbean, and then when it comes here to the United States, it's being sold through a distributor. That's my assumption because that's the legal way to do it, right? You can't buy it directly from Ed. Right. So, and I don't even know if he has reps. Do you know if he has brand reps?
I don't know. Yeah.
Or if the spirits sell themselves.
Right.
So even though he's the maker, he still has to have a middleman bringing the rum. He still has to have a middleman. Yeah,
that's the law.
That's so crazy.
Yeah. So as a matter of fact, some of the bars that we frequent here, one of the owners told me, I could buy a lot of the stuff that we use in our cocktails for less at Costco, but if I did that, I'd be breaking the law. I have to buy it from a distributor. And so they don't. Yeah. They don't. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, right? Because stuff happens under the table all the time. But that's just how you're supposed to do it.
Yeah, legally you're supposed to go.
Legally, you're supposed to go through a distributor. So you have Southern, which is one of them. Young's was bought out by RNDC, which is Republic National Distributing. And it's interesting because I've been to the RNDC warehouse before, and that's where bars go. I'll see bars show up there, like their bar managers will show up with a cart, and they'll be filling it up with everything that they need, and that's how they're stocking their bars. Or you can order it through either them or through Southern and just have it delivered. But you'll see these trucks driving around. They'll park at a bar and they'll unload a bunch of bottles because they're just having it delivered.
Yeah.
You know? So,
dang.
Yeah.
But then, so because of someone like Ed Hamilton, now we have all these unique rums that it's like if you go back to the 90s, like in your memory, and think of going to tiki bars, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's a lot of Bacardi.
A lot of Bacardi.
Yeah.
Like, what would you see behind the bar then compared to now?
It's crazy because, and I'm guilty of this too. In the 90s, when I would go to the bars, this is before I knew anything about crafted cocktails. But in my defense, there was no subculture for crafted cocktails.
Absolutely.
So when I was in my 20s and I was going out and getting drunk, I didn't care what I was drinking. You know, like it was just really the price point, which I think like that's why things were devolved, because bars were just trying to make as much money as they could, so they were using cheaper ingredients, and then they all competed with each other, so then they'd all like use cheaper until like, you know, that's where we were. Yeah. But it really was the dark ages.
Absolutely. Right? I feel like last time I was here, we chatted a bit about how, it was almost like a counterculture thing where like once the 70s hit, it's like all these kids that were now becoming of drinking age in the 70s were sort of like counterculture to their parents who were drinking these like, you know, frankly, comparatively complex cocktails born out of the living room cocktail lounge culture that was in the mid-century.
I think there was a lot of that happening. I think it wasn't just that. I think there was the counterculture thing happening, but I think that there was also profit margins getting squeezed, right? So we went through this period of, I remember as a kid hearing the word inflation a lot in the 70s. And so maybe these bars were just doing what they needed to do to keep their doors open, right?
That's true,
so all those elaborate ingredients and that elaborate procedure to make that drink went out the window because it was just too costly. Yep. So again, this is just a theory. You know? I have all these weird theories about that time because this fashionola, which we talked about earlier, it disappeared around that time, around the 70s, 80s, and 90s. But then we started seeing grenadine, right? Yeah. And I don't think grenadine was really part of the early cocktails. I could be wrong about that. I'm not a cocktail historian. But based on the timing, it makes me wonder, and this is one of my theories, if grenadine found its prolificness in the 70s because fashionola kind of disappeared, and so grenadine being the same color and it's a syrup, I'll just use grenadine instead. Yeah. And then you start seeing grenadine in cocktails, right? Yep. Because fashionola was no longer around. Again, it's a theory. Yeah. So,
and that's to go back to what we talked about in the first half. That's entirely possible that, like I know that there's a version of the zombie that was around back then that used grenadine in it, but I think that maybe it was really fashionola, and then it got replaced, so to speak, with grenadine in the recipe that was written down, where it was like, oh yeah, you toss a little bit of this stuff in there, and maybe, you know, fashionola sort of evaporated off the original.
Well, and even back then, right? So you have people that aren't really versed in the craft cocktail thing. It's really just a bar patron that if the drink looks right, if you're ordering a Purple Rain or you're ordering a Blue Hawaiian, it's got to be blue or it's got to be purple, right? And if you order a drink that normally had red fashionola in it and it's no longer red, they're going to say like, hey, this drink isn't even red, you know? Right. But grenadine's red, so you can kind of fake it, right? Grenadine's red, it's sweet. Yep. You can kind of fake it, you know? Yeah. I mean, most people aren't going to send it back.
Yeah,
you know?
Even a few years ago, I would think grenadine and maraschino cherry syrup were roughly the same thing, because sometimes one would get made cheaper. Maraschino is not the same as like the maraschino flavor that you would get in a Luxardo or something. But I would be like, oh, it's the same. It must be. It's the name is the same. The color's the same. They're probably the
Close
same
enough.
syrup. Yeah. They'll probably taste the same.
Yeah.
Nope.
Oh, the average person's not going to know.
Yeah.
You know? So, and if their goal is, like me, just trying to get a little buzz, you know, just trying to let loose a little bit, you know, it'll still do the job, right?
Absolutely. So you were in the, I think that you had brought up at one point in that 3 points distribution, how like because of that, weren't like small, like it makes it harder for smaller distilleries, right? In order to make money.
I would think so, because you have a distributor that wants to make as much money as they can. So if you're a small guy that's only producing, and we're just gonna use these numbers for examples. If you're a small guy that's only producing 1,000 bottles a year versus a big brand that's producing 1 million bottles a year, the distributor is going to want to do business with that. If they're only marking up those bottles by $1, they're making $1 million a year. They have to mark up your bottle, what, 10 times, 1,000 times, or whatever it is, right, to make the same kind of money. They'd have to mark it up 1,000 times, right, to make the same kind of money. So a lot of these distributors, you know, they don't care if you need distributorship and you're a small brand. A lot of them are like, yeah, you're too small, you know, like that's why a lot of these small guys don't have distributors, you know, and they're trying to figure out, okay, how do we get our product out there? They're having trouble getting distributorship. And I know that some brands, their workaround is they just create their own distribution company, right? Just like the car manufacturers, right? Getting around certain laws, right? Like Toyota, for example, they're only allowed to sell a certain number of units in the United States because there's some kind of like law. I don't know what you call it.
It's like an import limit law.
It's an import limit, right? So that they can't sell more than X amount of units, so it doesn't affect the United States market for GM. Right? So they might say, and I don't know what the number is, they might say you're only allowed to sell 1 million cars per year, you know, as Toyota. So then Toyota starts a new brand, Lexus. And Nissan started Infiniti. And Honda started Acura. They all did that so that they could sell more cars. Right? So
that's a way to work around.
So they double how much they could sell.
Like
and they're within the law because they're doing those as different brands. It's a completely different brand.
That's weird. Hey, that's crazy.
It's funny. That's it. This isn't exactly, spirits related, but the identical thing happened in the 80s with when Nintendo, the game company, they had basically had like a massive market share dominance, and all of these third-party game makers, like developers, they wanted to sell on Nintendo's platform, like on the NES. But they had a very similar law that was like, well, we're only going to take X amount of percent. You could only sell 3 games a year, I think, on the Nintendo if you were a third-party developer. That was it. They limited you to that. And so I know for a fact, like Konami, for example, which was one of the biggest game companies. Konami, So Konami's the big one, and they were making games like Contra and stuff like that. And but then they were developing more than 3 games a year, so they created a company named Ultra. That was the same company with the exact same developers and musicians and everything. And I remember figuring that out, like in the last 10 to 15 years, I learned this because I was like, it's funny that these Ultra games look and feel a lot like the Konami games, and then I'm like, oh, they're the same company. Same company. That's how I learned about that limit. Like a third-party limit thing. So it's like the exact same.
And these laws, too, are to protect the consumers from a monopoly forming, right? Because if there's a specific brand that monopolizes the market, they can basically charge you whatever they want, right? So because they're a monopoly, right? But by doing it this way, it doesn't look like it's a monopoly. But it doesn't matter, though, because if they can still keep the prices low because they're collecting money on all of them. They own all of it.
Yep.
So it doesn't matter. Like, you know, it's kind of the same thing with like today, like with a lot of the software that we use, a lot of the apps we use. I think PayPal owns Venmo. Did you know that?
Does it?
Yeah, that's what I heard. So PayPal owns Venmo, and what are all the brands like that? They're all part of the same company, right? Like Facebook,
Owns
Instagram,
quite a few,
that's all.
owns
WhatsApp.
Instagram.
They're all the same company,
Yeah.
This large umbrella company.
Yeah, they all got purchased.
right?
Yeah.
But if they consolidated them all, then it kind of forms a monopoly, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
it does.
So, but by keeping them separate, they can still own everything and not break that law, right?
Yeah.
It's creative, right? It's crazy, but there's creative ways that people get around it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Dangerously close to an antitrust.
dangerously, yeah. You know, we go back and forth. We'll see this stuff happen, and then laws will come out, and then, you know, people will find a creative way around it, right? And, you know, this is kind of a bad example. It's not like there are laws or anything, but, you know, we used to all have cable TV. You pay one price, and you get 300 some odd channels. And then people started breaking those up and saying like, I don't want to pay that, you know, and I'm just going to pay $20 for Netflix, and I'm just going to get Netflix.
Yeah.
And then you get Netflix, you get Hulu, you get Disney Plus, you get Paramount, you get, you know, you start adding all these, right?
Yeah.
And then now you're paying like all these different services. It's almost starting to be like, well, what, can I just pay one price and get all the channels? You know, which is where we started, right? We paid one price and we got like 300 something channels.
And
then
now
it's like, we don't want to do that. It's cheaper if we go this way, but then like it all adds up to almost being the same thing.
I mean, the funny thing is the irony of that is now Disney has actually purchased a large majority of all those individual streaming services. So now it's turning back into that again, where if you buy Disney Plus and get like a little bit of an extra bundle, you get Hulu, ESPN,
and HBO too, right? Because I get HBO through Hulu.
Oh, really?
What?
Yeah.
Oh, weird.
Whoa.
Yeah. It's bundled.
That's crazy.
Huh. Crazy.
Yeah.
It's interesting. There must be some like overlap in some of these.
Maybe through providers as well.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to tell me that Disney purchased all these different intellectual properties because they own Star Wars and, and Marvel and right. Those were all separate too, right? So now when you go to the box office and you spend $20 on a movie, it all goes to Disney. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So like, is there a monopoly happening?
Almost.
Right?
Disney's on the verge of potential antitrust.
Yeah. So I don't know.
Same story, just throughout.
Same story.
Just different categories.
It's just like the phone companies.
That's the world we live in now. Yeah, the phone companies. It was just like before.
There was a massive antitrust problem in the mid '90s with AT&T bought everything up.
Yeah.
And like Sprint and all that stuff and like Singular and all that started to consolidate.
Yeah.
The government actually, that was antitrust. They had to step in and break those ones up.
Yeah.
So that was crazy.
Yeah. So interesting stuff. What will be interesting to see is, you know, what happens in the next, even as recent as 5 years. Because, and even just for technology. So I lived in this era where I saw the rise, you guys did too. We saw the rise of this wireless world that we live in now, right? I mean, you know, as a child, like everything was analog. We used film on our cameras and I used cassette tape to put music on and then like we'd go from that to CDs and then CDs to digital and then digital to streaming. Like, you know, no one carries iPods anymore, right? Everything's all streaming. And then as technology gets more and more advanced, right, we go from having 1,000 records on shelves in the living room to having 10,000 records in our back pocket, right? Through streaming services, right? I mean, like, who would have ever thought back in the 90s when we were talking about the dark ages of drinking all this, you know, crap stuff, like internet wasn't part of our lives yet, you know? Who'd have thought that years later it would be like a utility, like you can't live without it, you know? You can't live without electricity, you can't live without water, you can't live without internet, You can't live without it, right? You can't be unplugged. What's that new technology going to be in the future?
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. So that always is freaking to me. I remember the first time that I saw an iPhone that was touchpad. So I remember, so let's say this. I remember my iPod, which had the click wheel.
Yeah.
And then they were showing how the new iPod was going to be, you know, here's the new iPod. And it was a screen. And I thought, like, well, how are they going to do that? Like, how do you select your music? And how do you, you know, and it didn't even occur to me that it would be touch screen, right?
Yeah.
Then the touch screen and the swipe and all that stuff. And I thought, wow. And then they started doing like do you have VR glasses?
No.
Not yet. No.
Yeah, no.
So my son got VR glasses, and you know, you put your phone in it, and he was like, "Oh yeah." He's like, "Check this out, Dad." He's, you know, and we would play a game, and the zombies and stuff would come out, right? And it scared me. Like they were just cartoons, but the noise and stuff, it would freak me out. So I'd pull the glasses off, and I'd be like, "I don't want to play this game anymore. I'm done." And he'd be like, why? And I'm like, it's too scary. And he's like, Dad, it's fake. It was, right? But it freaked me out. And now we have this thing where, you know, this new virtual world is coming, right? So we already saw that they did this concert with Tupac, right? Where they brought Tupac as a hologram.
Yeah.
Well, the technology is supposed to be where, like, now we could just put the VR on and we'll be in this world and we won't even know that it's fake anymore, right? And like the deepfake technology is already, just watching that is already freaky, right? It's like so good that it's scary, but couple that in a VR world, that's going to be freaky.
Yep.
Could be freaky in a good way. You could swim through Finding Nemo very peacefully in the waves.
Could be. I could see though something happening for us nerds, us tiki and cocktail nerds. We could put ourselves back in the original Don the Beachcomber bar.
Could do a whole walkthrough.
Yeah, walk through it. Or we could do the same thing with like the Kahiki or Trader Vic's.
Yeah.
You know.
The Outrigger. All these places that are retired, you know?
Yeah, we could have VR animators actually like render Trader Vic again.
Yeah.
And have them cuss us out. Right? And it would look real.
Yeah.
Right? Because if it's a VR character and it looks real, we could actually create all those false worlds, all the bars and restaurants that we want a time machine for.
Yeah.
That would be
super fun.
Wouldn't that be
crazy.
A little neat just to recreate the bar and have something where you could just do a look around and be like, so that's what it would look like.
Yeah.
Or close to.
Yeah. Yeah, because then, you would get the look and feel.
Almost like a recreation of a cocktail, trying to recreate the Mai Tai.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, man, that'd be fun.
So, I have a question for you. And we'll wrap on this question. There are articles that are out there now that are showing, like, you know, these days, cocktails, especially a crafted quality cocktail, is not cheap, right? So you have cocktails that are $25 now, right? And I'm sure you're aware of this. You've probably been to like a fine restaurant or like an upscale craft cocktail bar, and the cheapest drink on the menu is $18.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And so now you're seeing, like, you know, $20, $22, $24, $25, $26 for one cocktail, for one. So it's getting really expensive to drink these cocktails, right? And there's a number of things at play, right? Maybe it's the ingredients, maybe it's the cost of the real estate that the bar or restaurant is in. Maybe it's inflation, maybe it's all of the above. Maybe it all contributes to the rise of the cost of these cocktails. What do you think the future is? Do you think we keep climbing this craft cocktail ladder, or do you think things regress back to where we started using cheaper ingredients because people just don't want to pay that kind of money, and a restaurant has to stay profitable? I mean, in other words, do we go back to the dark ages?
To the dark ages,
right?
I mean, it's hard to predict, like, if the complex cocktail world will go through another phase of, becoming like way out of style.
Yeah.
My first instinct reaction to that question is that I feel like, just like in the restaurant world, I feel like there will always be a multi-bracketed scenario where, you'll have people, because that also is a direct response to whoever the clientele is. Mm-hmm. And so, like, as long as there's a demand for people who are seeking that experience, like, sure, there may just be less of them, but maybe it'll become more of a boutique thing where it's like, okay, well, there's one bar in this one place that if you're looking for that $30, ridiculous ingredients, experience, you can go there. But then, yeah, like as far as like a regular bar goes, or like a regular cocktail bar goes, it might get a little more pulled back.
I think I agree with you in the sense that finely crafted cocktail with the top shelf ingredients will never go away. There will always be somebody that will pay the price for that. But there's a breaking point somewhere for the average person. Like, what is that, right? It's already there for me. I'm not going to pay $25 for a cocktail, But what does that mean? Does that mean that, like, I have to buy an inferior cocktail now? If I want to buy something that's less than $20, right? Yeah. So am I going to get something that's made with bottled lime juice and bottled grenadine and bottled, things that aren't freshly made anymore, because that's no longer the cocktail I can afford? Mm-hmm. What's the breaking point going to be for the average person? It's already there for me, but this is the direction the bars are going. People are paying it so far, right? Mm-hmm. But when I was old enough to start drinking, and I'm going to age myself by saying this, so our listeners know that I'm in my 50s. So I started drinking. I turned 21 in 1989. And when I'd go to the bars back then in the early 90s, a $3 cocktail was not unusual. $3 to $4, right, for a cocktail. Happy hour, where you could get cocktails. You could get well cocktails for $2. As the times changed, and we went later on in the 90s, that well cocktail went up to $3, maybe $4, and then the crafted, and I put that in air quotes because we're still in the 90s. The better drink with the better ingredients were somewhere around $5, $6, maybe $7. And I remember $7 even being kind of high. Never in my mind did I ever expect to spend $20 on a drink, right? But this is where we are, right? Mm-hmm. And the people that are out there today, if this is the norm for them, what's the tipping point or the breaking point, right? Is it $30 a drink, $40 a drink? Right, your eyes got really wide. Yeah, $40 a drink. And our listeners can't hear your eyes getting really wide. They get really wide. But that's kind of super crazy to me. Yeah. Right. So, but if that's where a crafted cocktail gets to, then if we're trying to keep drinks under $20, so a place can stay in business, because maybe you're going to start losing customers at $30 a drink or $25 a drink, right? Yeah. So you have to use the cheaper ingredients, right? Do we start going backwards a little bit, right? Yeah. So it's one of those questions like, what is the future of craft cocktails, or what is the future of that subculture? Yeah. Right? Do we regress a little bit? Mm-hmm.
I do worry about it sometimes, in the sense, just because I'm someone who loves craft cocktails, but I think of it, it's like, it's so insanely popular right now that it feels like it can't get bigger. Yeah. And like, I remember when a couple tiki bars started showing up, like new ones started showing up circa 2009, 2010. And I remember at that moment, like, that's over 10 years ago now, being like, oh man, like, I feel so lucky that I'm going to bars at this moment, because after this, they're all going to go away.
They're all going to go away.
Yeah. And now it's like, it's only gotten bigger. Yeah. And so even more, I'm like, oh, like, we're super going to break that bubble.
Well, there's also the conundrum of, and this is what sucks, is, so you have a bar that they started charging $12 for a drink when everybody else was charging $10. Mm-hmm. But this bar was using better ingredients. Mm-hmm. So their drinks were in the $12 to $15 range. But then these other bars see that they can charge they're charging $12 to $15 for their drinks. Yeah. We should up our prices. So they do that because they know the market can bear it, not because their ingredients are better.
Yeah.
So if you go to a dive bar, right? There are dive bars that are selling you cocktails for $12 and everything comes out of a squirt gun.
Yeah.
You know? And how is that a $12 drink, right? Or a $15 drink for that matter, right? So there's that conundrum too, right? Like if everybody's going to keep raising to stay competitive and get their quote unquote piece of the pie, you know, where is that tipping point, you know?
Yeah.
So,
we'll see.
And then does it get to a point where a craft cocktail only exists in a 5-star restaurant?
Yeah.
Because that's the only kind of customer that is willing to pay for it.
Yeah.
You know,
start scaling it back.
Yeah. So what happens? So I don't know, just again, food for thought.
Yeah.
Thought it'd be something that would be interesting to close the episode with, and people can think about that.
We'll look back on this episode, you know, 5-10 years from now and see where we're at.
Remember when we talked about how $25 cocktail sounded so expensive?
Yeah. Oh no. Give me an old fashioned. $50, please. Oh no.
So what a scary thought.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again for coming out.
Thank you.
And being here inside the Desert Oasis room. I appreciate both of you making the trip. I know I don't exactly live around the corner. And so for our listeners out there, if you want to see what our friends here are doing, please check out their YouTube channel. That is youtube.com/Cocktail Fridays. And do you want to throw out your social medias if you want to have people check those out as well?
If you want to follow us on Instagram, we're just at it's at Badger Phone, which is Badger like the animal and Phone like
Badger Phone.
Yeah,
I love it.
Like an oldie timey telephone way of saying it. Yeah,
I love it. At Badger Phone, and I will put all those links in the description as well. And if you'd like to follow our adventures, we have a YouTube channel as well, youtube.com/Polynesian Pop. If you want to help support the channel, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/Polynesian Pop. And if you're listening to this podcast, you already know that you can find this podcast on all social media or all of our media channels, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Music, Google Play, all that kind of stuff. But check out desertoasisroom.com too. You can get it there, as well as check out our merch, which also helps support the show. And as always, I appreciate you listening to this episode. So until the next time, cheers and aloha, everyone.